We're going to go ahead and get started with this last panel. And I want to thank each of you for hanging in there all day. This has been a long but good day. So give yourself a hand for hanging in here all day. Thank you. Thank you. So this panel here is leveraging revitalization tools in opportunity zones. With us this afternoon, we have Karen Pikey. Pikey with Land Revitalization Coordinator for the U.S. EPA Region 6, Allison Saunders, Director of Tax Incentive, Louisiana Division of Historic Preservation, Charles Landry, Partner, Fishman Haywood LLP, and Bradley Swayze, Chief Operating Officer with Louisiana Housing Corporation. Chad, take it away.
All right, I'm going to stand up. I'm a mover. I don't do well sitting. Okay. All right, let me lower this down for shorties. Okay. Next slide, please, Chad. So normally I would have to explain to the audience the elements of revitalization, but you guys know that already. You already know that you need to have a plan. You already know that you need to have a reuse. You already know all those things. And I'm actually thinking about changing this because I was noticing everybody using all these acronyms, the OZ, and I wanted to call it the Land of Oz. We're going to go, and I may change this to the yellow brick road, okay? Imagine a yellow brick road, a young Dorothy going down this road, and she wants to visit the Land of Oz and have her little pot of gold at that end. And as she goes through that, she says, you know what, I got this great idea for this property, and nobody likes it. It looks ugly. Maybe it's an old, what's the name of that motel in Lafayette?
The LUS Pay.
The LUS Pay Hotel in Lafayette. And little Dorothy says, you know what? What can I do to make that less pay more? And so she says, oh, I need to find some friends. The Cowardly Lion. What was it? Scarecrow with no brain. And the Tin Man with no heart. I can tell you guys, y'all all relate to one of those characters, don't you? I'm not going to name names. I'm going to claim the Cowardly Lion who takes courage to take on a brownfield site. Come on, it does. Maybe a little bit of the scatteredness for the scarecrow, and it does take heart. You have to really want to do these. So next slide, please. Along with that, EPA offers a wheel of funding to go along with Dorothy down this road. We actually do assessment funding through grants. We do cleanup funding through grants, and we do a revolving loan fund through grants. And my colleague that spoke from South Central, Lisa, is it Lisa? Yay, I'm terrible with names. Lisa had explained what that kind of did. These are all programs designed to help Dorothy get rid of that ugly no-tell, hotel. No-tell? Let's tell.
Motel.
Let's say let's tell because no-tell is ugly too. Let's tell. So let's tell needs to have assessment done, and you know what? Probably needs to be demolished, but might have asbestos. Is that hard to imagine, asbestos in an old motel? How about some lead-based paint? Maybe the roof was kind of crappy and it's been leaking, and my God, is there mold in South Louisiana?
You don't have to have a leaky roof for that.
Okay, we're just going to stop there. Just the roof, okay? And so someone, let's call this, again, I always forget the guy that does the brain thing. Scarecrow. I'm going to call Chad, that's you, man. You're the brains. You're driving this. He says, I got some help. Dorothy, I'm going to do the assessment, which he did do. He's in the process of doing. Okay, and now he's going to go over to, let's say Lisa. Lisa, I'm sorry, baby. You're going to be the tin person. you know, I want to be politically correct, 10%. You've got the heart. You have revolving loan fund money to pay for that cleanup. If only you'll do that. If only you'll do that. Who else is left? It's the courage. Dorothy, I think Dorothy has her own courage. So maybe let's go ahead and say they do all that, and now we're on the way to Oz. Okay? We need some of, let's call the other people, I'll say the lion is all you investors. Please have the courage. Have the courage to invest in the No-Tell Museum, because it could be beautiful there. After it's gone and they build it, and you know what, it's going to be grand and lovely. It's going to change that landscape, and it will make it beautiful like Oz. The bottom half of my chart here, it's multi-purpose, targeted brownfield assessment and job training. Multi-purpose is another kind of grant where we try and combine both assessment and cleanup. Job training, I don't have time to go into that because I want to leave time for my fellow presenters. The targeted brownfield assessment, that's a service that we provide directly to you, because my colleague Chad always asks for more than he always gets. So it's not enough that we gave him an assessment grant, oh, you know, scarecrow person. He says, well, Karen, I don't have enough money to do that project in Arnaville, the hospital. Can you please help me out, EPA, in doing a site assessment? And I said, yes, because, you know, I don't have a brain either. And I said, yeah, sure, I can do the assessment for that one for you. And they've got a great project going on. So we do provide free site assessment. My colleague, Rebecca Otte, wave up there, Rebecca, yay! She's with Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. They can also provide free site assessment on your behalf, both phase 1s and phase 2s. Phase 2s is where sampling. Phase 1 is this, just a transaction. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I want you guys to take away, because this week, just yesterday, I met this lovely woman from Lafayette, and she's working on this great project with the hospital district. They had a donation of an old clinic. I don't remember where the clinic is. Do you remember, Chad? Doesn't matter. It's decrepit, and they want to rehab it into a, what do they call, a Medicaid service, because that is a much needed service here in Lafayette. That's what I understand. Here is the problem. This entity accepted that lovely donation of land and the property and the building on it. The building dates back to the 50s. Are you following me? And that means probably there's asbestos in there. Probably some more lead-based paint, probably some PCBs, biphenyl chlorides, some mercury switches, because that was part of the deal when you had some of these clinics, right? They have a little bit of stuff. So she's like, well, doesn't EPA have cleanup grants? And I said, yes, we do, but you didn't do your due diligence in your phase 1 before you accepted that donation. How valuable is that land in that property if you don't do your phase 1, which leaves you open to be eligible to receive cleanup funding? I hope and pray that the IRS actually stands up and says, yes, we recognize substantial improvement to be cleanup activities. Let's be nice to our IRS people. That would be awesome for everyone. Because that means you don't have to come back through EPA and say, poor me, I didn't do my environmental due diligence. Can you please give me cleanup money? And I'm going to have to say, bah, humbug, no. You can't get it because you didn't do your environmental due diligence. If you don't take anything else away from today, please do your phase 1. And it's only good for 180 days. It keeps your options open for cleanup. Next slide, please. Let's focus on some successes that have actually taken place that probably could have benefited from some Oz funding. I love that, I'm sorry. I'm never letting that go. Next slide, please. Mixed-use development. Here in Louisiana. Anyone see the Commerce Building lately in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Show of hands. You remember how dingy it looked, that dull gray, and it was like, ugh. It just looked like something out of a time warp, didn't it? It was pretty bad. And there was someone with some real vision, the developer. I don't remember the gentleman's name. I don't think I ever met him. But he came in to the revolving loan fund program at Lisa's group and said, because Baton Rouge is part of their coalition, and they said, we need $500,000 to abate asbestos, and I think it's 7 or 8 floors there. Does anybody know how many floors are in the Commerce Building? Let's say 7. 7's a nice round number. I like 7. It's a lucky number. 8. Well, all right. Be particular. 8. So what is it now? It is one hot property, isn't it? It's got that great coffee house on the bottom. It's got those lofts, which probably none of us, well, some of y'all can afford because y'all look pretty wealthy. But the rest of us, it's got, you know what, it's great. It's a great asset to downtown Baton Rouge. That would have been great, right? It's already done. Next slide, please. Okay, anybody been by the Tessier building? Wow, they're like, what, really? Tessier building? It's got historic tax credits, doesn't it? Well, it also had asbestos, and again, came through our revolving loan fund. We were able to do that one. They moved it along. Now it's mixed-use offices, residents. It's lovely, isn't it? Next slide, please. Arts and culture, because you know what? If Louisiana has something, it's arts and culture and history, don't we? In spades. Next slide. This is a great project. This is the old Ford dealership in Lockport, Louisiana. Anybody know where Lockport, Louisiana is? Come on, really? You should be ashamed of yourself if I gotta tell you where that is. I'm from Texas. You should know. That is Mayor Champagne in front of the old Universal Cab. This is such a beautiful building. It's a small building in Lockport. And we provided site assessment upwards through grant funding and TBA of $600,000 for this tiny dealership with the lot behind it. And the lot just happened to have quite a few underground storage tanks, which, by the way, abutted, I don't know, the lock, a water body. That is really bad in the environmental world. That means it's way more expensive to remediate and more complicated. $600,000 worth of investment for assessment because no one else had the courage, the heart, or the brain to do this except Mayor Champagne. He awarded us. He said, this is a great project. Now you're like, why would you do that? Why would you spend that kind of money there? So that they could open up the Center for Traditional Louisiana Boats, which, by the way, was housed at Nicholls State University in some dingy warehouse that you had to have a really magical map to find. Because let me tell you what, you had to really want to see it. You really had to want to see it bad to find it. And now it's lovely. And they actually have a little theater there. Lockport's kind of happening. It's getting there. It's slow. But what isn't? But I love this story because it was $150,000 worth of cleanup for this tiny little lot with these underground storage tanks. They had to have a engineered control, which is a slurry wall, by the way. That's kind of expensive because that means ongoing maintenance. They had to actually deed restrict this, all just to have a museum there. But the museum is lovely, and it really captures your history. I wish that more people were going to Lockport to see this thing. We're going to talk about this, Chad and Monique, about how to promote y'all's tourism in this part of the world. But anyway, my point back to you is these are Oz kind of projects. And they went forward anyway because there was the brains, the heart, and the courage to do them. And I hope that you find that in future for some of our brownfield projects that come across your desk or that come across your attention, please. Thank you so much. Next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Saunders. I'm the Tax Incentives Director for the Louisiana Division of Historic Preservation. And I have come to talk to you today about the exciting, thrilling world of historic tax credits. Our office, the Division of Historic Preservation, I think someone mentioned earlier acronym soup. We're also known as the SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Office. So if you hear these terms, it's the same office. It's just kind of like we have little aliases, I guess you would want to say. And we're housed within the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. We are a state agency that falls under the direction of the Lieutenant Governor. So I have the joy of administering in Louisiana two of the most powerful economic revitalization tools that we have in the country. Here in Louisiana, we have the 20% federal historic rehabilitation tax credit and the 20% state commercial tax credit program. And I'll talk to you briefly about both of those, but really what I want you to remember is that if you have a building that's at least 50 years old and you're interested in putting some money into it, call our office. You don't have to remember all this. This is all we do day in and day out. So some folks mentioned their programs have these sin prohibitions. We do not have that. So bring us your historic strip clubs, which I've worked on. Bring us your liquor stores, bring us your bars. We're here to save and promote true Louisiana culture. So the first program I'm going to talk about today is the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit. This is the oldest program we have of this type in the country. It was originally established in 1978. This is the OG, if you will. It's leveraged billions of dollars in private investment in Louisiana's historic properties. Literally billions here. We're hitting almost $2 billion at this point since '78. And just in the last year alone, we had, I think, a combined, it was $581 million in direct investment in Louisiana's historic buildings. So that's something we do very well here in Louisiana. In fact, it's something we're the best at in the country. So you hear often that Louisiana's on the bottom of every list. This is something that we're at the top of. And that's because we have great investors, we have great infrastructure, and we have people that truly love and realize the importance of their historic buildings within their communities. This is a program that's jointly administered by the Internal Revenue Service and the National Park Service. And we at the state level act as the liaison between the applicants and those governmental entities. Next slide, yeah. So this program exists to drive investment into the historic downtown cores and historic districts of communities. It offers a direct dollar-for-dollar return in the form of tax credits. So that's much better than a deduction. So instead of just lowering your tax rate, this is actually a dollar-for-dollar credit. And the credit itself is 20% of all your qualified rehabilitation expenditures that go into the building. So this is going to be everything that's permanent and structural. The description I often hear is that you take the building, turn it upside down, shake it, and everything that stays attached is basically a qualified cost. It does also include some soft costs. So if you're working with attorneys, architects, those fees can be rolled into your development costs. You can also get credit on that. And the one thing I do always advise is that with like any tax program, make sure that you consult with your tax professional to ensure that you're able to utilize this credit if you do earn it. And so here you'll see a map of the National Register of Historic Places districts here in Lafayette. That's the area that's shaded in the pink, you can see. So we have the Freetown, Puerto Rico Historic District, just kind of highlighted that one. And so this credit is available for those buildings that are located within National Register Historic Districts, and also those buildings that, are individually listed within the National Register of Historic Places. So you can see some examples here. And then on the next map, you'll see that we have this great tax incentives maps that shows you the different layers. We'll get into some of the other ones later, but the stars also show all the buildings that are individually listed in the National Register. So what are some things you need to keep in mind with this program? What are the restrictions? What are the parameters? Well, first and foremost, your projects need to be commercial in nature. That is, they need to be income producing. So that could be rental residential, that could be commercial, it could be industrial. Any of these uses would be qualifying. See previous note about strip clubs and bars, et cetera. They do have to be listed within the National Register of Historic Places or individually listed within the National Register. And they do need to remain income producing for at least 5 years after the building is placed in service for you to get the full value of the credit. One of the things that ends up being kind of the biggest drawback to this program is that it is for substantial rehabilitation. And that's actually a number that the IRS comes up with based on your particular building. So they actually look that you're spending your building's value to meet the minimum requirement to enter into this program. So if you buy, building and land for $250,000 and the land is valued at $50,000, you need to spend at least $201,000 in qualified rehab costs to meet the requirements of the program. And that basis can be measured over 2 years or 5 years, depending on if you phase a project. And then, of course, all these projects have to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. I'll talk briefly about those a little later. And despite popular opinion and what you would hear from developers, this program is not an entitlement. It is actually a credit that must be earned. So you have to meet this higher threshold of these rehabilitation standards to actually qualify for the program. And so it is a pretty simple 3-part application process. All applications are submitted in duplicate to our office at the state level. We keep one and we forward one to the National Park Service with our comment and recommendation. We're kind of their eyes and ears on the ground, but what comes out of it that's so good is that we have the opportunity to be a real advocate on your behalf to them. Part 1 is making sure you have a qualifying building. Part 2 is your work description. That's what we look at to make sure it meets those standards. And then part 3 is submitted once your project's actually complete and placed in service. And so once that part 3 is approved, that's when you've actually earned the credit. One thing to keep in mind is that the federal credit is not transferable. So it does actually have to stay with the owner of the property for the full 5 years. Otherwise, you do lose some of the value of the credit. And so just be aware that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 did substantially affect the federal credit. In fact, it was written out of the legislation altogether. And through the leadership of Senator Cassidy, the Louisiana delegation, and then a really great bipartisan effort, it was one of the few credits that was actually added back into that federal legislation. So Louisiana kind of led the way of saving this for the rest of the country. But with those alterations, they did kind of have an impact. So most notably, it altered the credit from a 1-year credit, which means that once you placed your building in service, you earn the credit, you could actually take the full value of the credit in that first year and instead change it to a 5-year credit. So you get that prorated portion of the credit each year over 5 years applied to your federal taxes. So before going through this process, please make sure that you consult with your tax professional to ensure that you can actually earn this credit, actually use the credit if you earn it. And so we just have the note and the link for the guidance on the public law. IRS hasn't actually issued any definitive guidance on the changes to this, and of course the government being shut down recently hasn't helped that process along. Next slide. So just be aware, I'm an architectural historian. I'm not an accountant. I cannot offer you tax advice. I don't know it. I like to, as they say, stay in my lane. And so go to your tax professional for tax advice, but maybe ask us about how to rehab your historic windows or something. So, let's see. So based on the overwhelming success of that federal historic rehabilitation tax credit program, in 2002, the Louisiana legislature passed a corresponding piece of state legislation, which basically mirrors the federal, but for a few small changes, just enough to make the whole thing really confusing. Next slide. So this is a 20% state income tax credit. It's on those same expenses we talked about for the federal program. So the twinning or stacking of these is very much encouraged. That was actually the intention of that legislation. And the state credit is, like I said, very similar to the federal. It is for those income-producing buildings. But instead of being limited to National Register districts, these are for buildings that are located in certified cultural districts or downtown development districts. And instead of having to meet that high adjusted basis for the federal program, in this case, you only have to spend at least $10,000 for each project to qualify. And with historic buildings, I mean, that doesn't even cover replacing a roof usually. And of course, they do have to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. And so you'll see this map. There are cultural districts all across the state. So this same map on our website, you'll see the cultural districts are highlighted in yellow. So I think we have a couple of those down here, and Danielle mentioned I think they're pursuing the opportunity for a couple of more. And then we also have a link to the different DDDs throughout the state on our website as well. So some other things to keep in mind with the state credit is that unlike the federal credit, which has no cap nationwide, no cap on the number of projects allowed, this program does have a cap. It's really a cap. It's $5 million in credits earned per investor, per year, per district. So, but it's a cap. It is a cap. But there is no current limit on the amount of credits that can be earned throughout the state of Louisiana. One thing that makes the credit really good and really makes it the platinum standard of legislation throughout the nation is that this is a certificated credit. So once you actually place your building in service and you earn the credit, it basically becomes a certificate in your hand. It's entered in the tax credit registry. It is assured by the Louisiana Department of Revenue that's there. And so it makes transferability of this very safe, very secure, and basically guaranteed by the state. So people buying and selling these credits or using these credits as equity in deals is what gets so much of the development underway. And I'll just say that our legislation has been used as a template for a lot of other states, and I'm giving like Texas side eyes because theirs is like copied from ours word for word. It's good. And so the same application process you'll see with the federal on the next slide. It's the same kind of 1, 2, and 3. However, the buck stops with us. Instead of it having to go to the National Park Service, it does just stay within our office. And then I mentioned the standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. With both of those programs, all projects have to conform to those standards. And so there are 10 basic standards that ensure that the historic character of the building is maintained, but you're making it compatible for your new modern use. And then sometimes you'll see that these terms are kind of used interchangeably, but they are actually defined. We follow the rehabilitation standards. And the standards apply to the interior and the exterior of the building, a little different than what you might see with your local regulatory historic district commissions. And that they apply to buildings of all shapes and sizes, from a 30-story skyscraper to the teeny tiniest little, like shotgun on the bayou. And then we do have a wealth of information available on our website, on the National Park Service's website, about interpreting the standards, some common pitfalls, things like that. And I have quick examples, might go through just one. So this is like kind of your dollars example of stacking the federal and state credits. So 800 Louisa, New Orleans. It was a little corner store in the Bywater. It was built around 1860. The balcony had been removed in the 40s. We could see this from Sanborn maps. And then it was renovated into an apartment and restaurant for about $372,000 in QREs. And so then you can kind of see the breakdown. So 74 and change in federal credits, the same in the state credits. They earned almost $150,000 back in the form of historic tax credits and offset their project cost by 40%. And then, so sometimes we do have the question come up about, well, what about if I live in part of the building? Basically, you just back the square footage out of the part that's your owner-occupied portion and then use the credit on the rest. This is actually a really cool project in Gretna. It's a state trooper who is retiring, and he decided he was going to open a pizza shop with his family and live up above. So the second floor is their residential space. The first floor became the pizza shop. And so they basically, in this case, backed their costs out, their actual costs out of their residential portion because it was so much less. So instead of allocating their credits on a square footage basis, they just actually tracked the costs. So the next slide, you'll see. So they ended up spending about $530,000, earning $106,000 in state commercial credits, $106,000 in federal, So it was $213,000 in credits total. This time we were only looking at a 31% offset. So still tasty, but not quite as tasty as if it's 100% commercial. And then you'll see the opportunity map, opportunity zones, OZ, O-zones, opportunity zones. These are some examples of what we have into Lafayette. And we have this map on our website. We actually have the whole state. We imported those LED maps, and so we overlaid them with our cultural district maps and our national registered maps. So on the next slide, if you're a savvy investor and you're looking for some tasty deals with lots of money being able to come back to you, then I would start with this map. If there's a property you're interested in, like I looked up 800 Johnston Street here, and it just happens to be smack dab in the middle of the Opportunity Zone, the Freetown Puerto Rico National Register District, and also the Downtown Lafayette Cultural District. So at this point, I know if I have the right building, I'm looking at a potential 40% return on my investment. And then this is going to be very interesting to people who are have those Opportunity Zone funds. This is going to be a really good deal. So visit our website. We do have the information for the maps, those overlays. We have the applications for the different programs, information on the standards, and all of our contact information. So next. So as a community, what are things you can do to help bring those dollars in? And this is where you kind of have to open your minds a little, because if you're looking at National Register districts, the first thing people say is, "Oh, I don't want people telling me what color I can paint my building and things like that." When in fact, National Register districts are completely honorary. Local historic districts are usually more regulatory, but National Register districts, property prices are generally well above on a square footage basis of the property surrounding them that aren't in National Register districts. And those districts really open the door to a lot of funding opportunities, not just historic tax credits, but also when grants become available. Usually one of those first things they're going to look at is, are you a National Register property? So as a community, you want to be looking at ways you can fund surveys and listings of National Register districts, and there are grants available for that. Not lots of bricks and mortar grants available anymore, but grants for development and planning are out there. So this would be the kind of thing as a community leader you would be pushing for or trying to get your historic districts surveyed. The cultural districts are accepted on yearly rounds. There's one going on right now. I think the deadline is in March for that, so that's something that you could be doing right now to incentivize economic development in your community. And look at those areas as a place where you can make stacks and show potential investors that you're really attuned to development and you've got these things that are ready to go. And if you are interested in learning more on historic tax credits, which I know you all are, come to Baton Rouge in May. On May 2nd, we're hosting a one-day seminar in conjunction with the Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation, where we'll be doing a Historic Tax Credit 101 all day, taking a tour of a really cool new project there in Baton Rouge, and just having a really good time. So thanks.
Good, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to give you the least complicated way of what I call filling the gap in projects. All of this information that you've heard today, dealing with geographic limitations and historic and colors and Oz and all of this, really does not apply to what I'm about to say. And I'm immodestly going to tell you, I think this is hotter in Louisiana right now than opportunity zones. All right? Opportunity zones are going to take time to understand that you're dealing with the complexity of the federal government. What I'm going to go through very quickly with dealing with economic development districts is the hottest component of development right now throughout the whole state of Louisiana. I have 20 of these going on. I didn't even know there was such a thing as the Louisiana Association of Assessors. I was their keynote speaker because they're getting inundated by people talking about economic development districts. What it is nothing more than a special taxing district It's local government, all right? It's in a well-defined geographic area that the governing authority, which I will get into who that is, makes a decision as to where it would like to create an economic development district. It is no different than any sort of special district like school districts, fire districts, community development districts, art development districts. It just so happens in Louisiana, happily, in most other states, we have the opportunity to create a special taxing district for economic development. As broad as that term is, in your mind, that is how broad you can establish these and what you can use them for. Now you can see there have been all kinds of other very special taxing districts in other creative places, but I want to focus on just economic development district. The idea is there are two components in Louisiana. We're blessed with two ways. Can y'all hear me? Thank you. Two ways of using an economic development district, all right? One is if you can get a governing authority to allow you to use the incremental tax created as a result of a development within an economic development district, you can use incremental tax. Please do not refer to these, hey Mayor, nice to see you back there, as TIFs, okay? As soon as you say TIF, there'll be 10 or 20% of the people you talk to are going to have some negative reaction, and the negative reaction is because they don't know what they're talking about. So we want you to know what you're talking about, and what we're talking about are economic development districts that as a mechanism for financing, you're using a portion of what would otherwise go to the city, for example, or a parish, the incremental amount for a project, okay? Now that's kind of hard to do. Mayor up there, Joel's gonna say, I need my money, all right? I've got more need than you do for your project. So the incremental piece of this is kind of hard to get unless your project is really juicy. It really is going to create a lot of jobs, a lot of benefits, like Cabela's and Bass Pro. Even the state threw in on those projects to make that happen. We used all of the city's money, all the state's money to get the Hilton, the Capitol Center Hilton in Baton Rouge. And as a result of that one hotel, the first one, we now have over 1,200 hotel rooms in Baton Rouge. Every single one of them used an economic development district. All right? This is hot, it's available, and you should know about it. The second piece is what you really need to focus on because it's easy. And that is you can create a new tax within the economic development district that can be used only for the benefit of what goes on inside that district. And so it's a real easy sale unless there are iced tea people and they don't want a project across from River Ranch here in Lafayette. It's the only one I know that's ever been defeated, by the way, because all you're doing is taxing yourself. You're putting a tax only within the economic development district to fill in the gap and get some additional funding, all right? There's plenty of legislation that creates the authority to do this, principally as it relates to the incremental piece. But as we found out in the Cabela's case, which I was involved in, we made a mistake. How many lawyers are you going to find that says that loud? We made a mistake because both in Gonzales or Cabela's and in Livingston, everybody wanted to throw in their taxes. They wanted it so bad that the school board said, I'll give you an increment on my tax. The sheriff department, I'll give you an increment on my tax. And all this happened, and both those projects went forward until this guy in Livingston said, no, you can't do that. If the tax was levied for a specific purpose, it can be only used for that purpose. And we went, yeah. So what did we do? We went back to the voters, and 83% said that where there was a tax for the sheriff, it could include economic development. Where there was a tax for the levy board, economic development. 83% in Gonzales, 87% in Ascension. We'll never do that again. All right, it's too hard. So what we do is focus on undedicated taxes, property or sales tax, what goes into the general fund, or dedicated taxes, which again, y'all, in Lafayette Parish, LEDA has a dedicated tax for economic development. It's very unusual. All right? So here's what authorizes, for all you want to take pictures and materials, you to do the incremental piece, but this isn't relevant, and please don't go read these things. They're very, very complicated, but the bottom line is it's politics. And whether you can convince a governing authority to allow you to use some portion of their undedicated sales tax, and the reason why I'm going to focus on sales tax is in Louisiana, virtually all of our property tax is dedicated. We have never done an economic development district using property tax, all right? It's always been on sales tax, and it has to be undedicated, all right? So now, however, this is where the game's played with the new tax. And you can levy up to 2 cents of new tax within an economic development district. It's only on businesses in the district. That can be sales tax, it can be hotel occupancy tax, you can have 5 mils of property tax. But you never want to do property tax, because the whole purpose of this is that, and they attribute this to Huey Long, it wasn't Huey Long, it was Russell Long. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. And the whole idea of an economic development district with new sales tax is that you're taxing someone else. It's the person who's driving into the district and buying something, all right? If you put property tax on, you're taxing the businesses in the district, and that gets reflected in their prices. They don't like that, all right? So you go to a hotel in the French Quarter, and they tell you that the hotel is $350, and you get your bill, and it's $412, because they have all this tax stuff that they add. That's the point. You as a consumer, you've got to, they tell you it's $350, but there's a booth parade this, there's this, that, and the other, and it's handled the same way. It's collected just like any tax. It's a government body subject to public record, open meetings, legislative auditor, ethics code. It's the same deal. And I want you to look at this slide. Okay? Other than cash, all right, movables and product, you can finance everything on that page. Okay? We laughed about, gambling and this, that, and the other. There's no limitations about any of that. It's what the governing board, if the property is in the city council creates the EDD. If the property in the parish council, police jury does EDD. It's not established by the developer. There is no application by the developer to form an EDD. The governing authority does that on their own motion, and all of this can be used, the money can be used. It can be paid directly. For example, a project we have in Zachary, the city put in a roundabout. The EDD is going to reimburse the city. The money went from the city's coffers to build it. There'll be a reimbursement. It can be reimbursed to the developer, and it can be reimbursed to contractors. That gets a little tricky. You have to negotiate a term. Typically, it's a length of time, but sometimes it's the amount of money. Sometimes it's the earlier or the later of both. So again, that's part of your negotiation. They're usually about 10 years. In 2008, a good friend of mine, Steve Terrio, was a legislator, but was appointed as legislative auditor. He was asked by the legislature to look at the burgeoning economic development districts that were going all over the state. There were probably 20 of them at that time. And we all, those of us in the industry, thought he was going to kill us. And he came out and he said, no, these are good things, all right? But he told the governing authorities, hey, look, what you need to do is be proactive in terms of an economic development district as opposed to reactive. Instead of having the developer come to a city of decide under what circumstances do we that justify or support the formation of an EDD. And most of it is typically what LED does in terms of its grants for new businesses. What are the jobs created? What are the taxes created? Are we going to create an incentive to do economic developments in an area that we want revitalization and the like? So it was a very good report. The final thing is they are going on all over the place. And I'm originally from Lafayette. I say this with some humor. When I was the chair of the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce, they asked me about how wonderful Baton Rouge is. It was a simple place. And I said, I happen to live in Baton Rouge, but my home is and will always be Lafayette. And why? Because this has always been a town where there's been a cutting edge to virtually everything that's going on. LUS is a true culture here. The most successful EDD happens to be in Lafayette Parish, right on Louisiana Avenue. It's an amazing success story. And if those of you who want to know a little bit more about that, there's my number. Give me a call. And that was 9 minutes for an hour and 30-minute speech.
Hello, I'm coming up, I think, in a minute. Speaking of acronyms, when I first moved to Louisiana, what was the name of the office building we worked in? The SOB. What agency did we work for? OCD. From the DOA. Of the SOL. Wow. Well, and my name is Bradley Swayze, and that's BS. BS from the SOB, of the OCD, and DOA, SOL. Here to talk to you about, like a program, many programs like he was just speaking of, in 10 minutes, that takes about 2 years to learn. Anyway, so when we look at we are the state housing finance agency. The state housing finance agencies across the nation were created back in the 70s and 80s, really when it was really difficult, and which it is now again, for minorities and low-income individuals and families to purchase a home. So housing finance agencies were created to help boost that ability for home ownership. And as the times evolved, there were programs like the home program, and you heard the doctor speak earlier about some of the things that are directly allocated here. Home program and LAHEAP, federal programs, and they moved them over to what they call the State Housing Finance Agency. And then the State Housing Finance Agency became more like a state agency with its federal block grants. And as the market began to change a little bit with less home ownership with our mortgage revenue bonds. And also, then the tax laws changed. How many are aware of the tax laws changed in 1986, 87? Yeah. Well, they did. And if you were a big $1 million investor and you made tons of money off of your millions of dollars, you're probably aware that it changed around 86. And really what that change was is how they could recoup capital gains. And there was a program that was created called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. How many are familiar with the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit program? Okay, well that program is what I'm mainly going to talk to you about. Can you get to the next slide? It's just for the Acadian.
Separate files.
And that's fine. So and I don't have a huge PowerPoint. I had a 33-page PowerPoint. It'll be sent up. You can look at it. Really, this 10 minutes of talking, what I really want to do is draw you into why affordable housing and investing in affordable housing is good, and how these opportunity zones are good in one way and different for us in another way. So when I say that, we don't want to concentrate low-income families in one area, especially in areas that are distressed already. We want to create opportunities for them to live in areas where there are opportunities, like hospitals and transient and malls, and where the income is high, the good schools and stuff like that. So we don't want to create concentration of housing. And so what we got, and you can't see it well there, but I think there's another map up there. You can see projects that we have funded from the low-income housing tax credits over the year that are already in these census tracts. When we think of the low-income housing tax credit program, you're going to, if you're not a developer, if you're a little bit familiar with it, the investors and the banks and the syndicators and the folks involved, that I believe that are involved, they're going to be involved in the opportunity zone package, if you will, are the same investors, syndicators, and taxpayers that are involved in the low-income housing tax credit. Y'all ever watch Good Times? Remember JJ? Dynamite. So that was what he lived in a housing project, right? So what we've learned, and this is where you see this with the opportunity zones, because I see it's sort of the same concept advancing. What we learned back in the day was that, ain't we lucky we got them good times, that those type of developments weren't always the best to say, okay, let's put low-income folks in one area, in one part of town, and make it look like this, and there's where it is, and then the federal government will pay the rent, subsidize it with capital funds every month, every year, and everything will be fine. Well, when budget talks come, they cut budgets, and it makes it hard sometimes. So then that housing authority or that project has to survive based upon what Congress wants to do every year. So what they sort of did was and also moving people who are low income in one area and saying this is where the low income folks are going to be, it doesn't work very well. We recognize that mixed income, mixed use works best. Why does it work best? Because we're a mixed entity. I mean, we're a mixed nation. So you've got to have people who work there, the people who are making money there. Does everyone agree mixed income, mixed use is the best concept? And so thinking about that 60, 70, 80 years ago, they didn't think like that. I mean, they were like, low-income folks can live here. So anyway, we've learned. And that the housing credit program is really that evolution from the late 80s and how it works. And they were like, okay, instead of the federal government and allowing it to be managed by federal public housing authorities, which they still exist, and so they're still there, let's create a private sector incentive so that people can park their money into good deals that in return create affordable housing for families to live. So these tax incentives and these housing credits, a lot of the times it's not, okay, I want to do something good for the community, so I'm going to go invest in low-income housing tax credits. If you're a tax investor, if you're creating hotels or anything else, they want to park there, they want a rate of return, they want a capital gains on their tax. And the government at the time said, okay, well, let's switch this. Let's create tax incentives for developing affordable housing. And it's working. It's one of the biggest, most impactful programs in the nation that help create affordable housing, especially at a mixed level, mixed income. And a lot of times you can't even tell when you see a low-income housing tax credit project, like you used to be able to do with Good Times. And sometimes you can't even tell that a project, especially historic preservation, needed some of the low-income housing tax credits to get done so you can have affordable housing and have housing. That style of program is what we're looking at. And so when I saw the opportunity zone and I heard it coming out, I started to think, that's, to me, is, if there wouldn't have been Cab Calloway, there might not have been Prince, and all this stuff, so you have that evolution. I think if there wouldn't have been the low-income housing tax credit program, there might not have been the opportunity zones. They're learning, they're evolving, and that's my personal opinion. And when we look at how are we going to impact these opportunity zones with the resources we have, I see it as twofold. I think from the mayor and the mayor president, from their point of view, we have to create a strategic plan together with the resources that the city may have, the resources that these opportunity zones will bring in, and then the opportunities of the week. Because we don't want to just arbitrarily start funding stuff and it's contradictory, or it's over subsidizing, or it's creating housing, condensed housing. We want to work in unison together. So, because one, here's the situation: we have 600,000. We actually have like 598,000 families that are renting in the state of Louisiana. I rounded up to 600. I'm going to round up the next piece too, because 53% of those 598, 53% of those I'm actually going to round down. The 53% of those 53% of the 598,000 households in the state of Louisiana that are renting are rent burdened. You know what that means? That means they're paying almost 40, in some cases over 40% of their income, and it's really 30%, but we're in a more dramatic situation. So we have about 300,000 families that are renting in the state of Louisiana that are renters, 300,000 families that are paying almost 40% of what they earn for rent and housing costs. Okay, so you can see why the low-income housing tax credit program is important. You can see why the funds that the city parish gets and the funds that we have, so right now, in order to address the need for housing in the state just for renters, and I'm talking about homeowners who need their home repaired, I'm not talking about folks who just need a little bit of help to buy their first home, but just that population of 300,000 or so that are rent burdened, we need to create over 100,000 units that are affordable today to solve that problem. We're producing, just through our entity, we're producing about 1,100 units a year. So you can see why that strategic planning is important, because if we don't do it, the resources we have to solve and address these issues is much less than the need we have. And anyone agree? Y'all have an amen? Do you know this for sure? Yeah, I mean, it's for sure. I see HUD, you're right. We got problems. Right. You're stealing my thunder. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. And I want you to know I did not have people planted in the audience. But she's right. So when I think of the opportunity zones, what would be ideal is there's an investment, there's an opportunity, and there's jobs being created. And the private sector is creating home ownership. They're building subdivisions. They're building houses. And we're able to, through home ownership vouchers, we're able to. So we have folks to take that 300,000, to draw that picture for you. Some of that 300,000 folks and families that are paying almost 40%, some paying half of their, are paying $800, $900, $1,100 a month rent to live. We can put them in a home and have their mortgage and PITI, their principal, taxes, and insurance, less than what they're paying in rent. But it's hard to get them there because they need a down payment, closing costs, their credit score may not be there, but things like that. So if we can get that private sector building those houses because the need's there, the demand's there, and we can pull folks out of those affordable units that are needed, because I didn't go deeper, that of the 300,000 that are rent burdened, about 200,000 or so, like 190,000 of those are extremely low income. Those are your seniors, they're disabled, they're in situations where their income is so low that it's almost impossible. So tying that back on how the low-income housing tax credit works, you saw the good times, you know how projects and how that worked. The government would send the check every month to help pay for the rent. What it does, in the same concept I see as the opportunity zones, is it says, all right, how much debt can a project finance to rent to individuals and families that can only pay $250, that can only pay $300? Well, that's really what the concept of the housing credit program. It doesn't come with a Section 8. There sometimes are, but it doesn't come with the payment from the feds every month paying the rent. It says, okay, we want you to rent to working families or extremely low-income families that can only pay $150, that can only pay $200, that can only pay $300 a month rent. And we underwrite that and finance that through the tax credit program, which is the same investors, the same syndicators, the same folks who are going to be purchasing the opportunity zone, right? They're going to be the same, probably the same group, so that they can earn that rent and not have a rent. In other words, they don't have a huge debt to pay. So Back in the old days, it would be, okay, I'm going to loan you $1 million. You're going to pay me this much in a month on your mortgage payment. You have to charge a certain amount of rent in order to pay your debt, and that's the landlord issue. The landlord has now flood insurance, property insurance. They have operating costs that are skyrocketing that forces them to have to charge a rent just in order to make their operating costs. And a lot of times, and Louisiana is unique in this. And I learned this when I came here. Louisiana is unique in that it has a lot of small mom and pop landlords who at one time invested or got inherited those rental units with with the plan that this is going to help me retire one day. Well, then we had things happen like Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, Isaac, floods, the BP oil spill. It was just yeah. And so and then Congress raised the insurance up, and so now what you thought was going to be an investment or something to retire to help put that family on a way to wealth building and poverty, getting them out of poverty, it now becomes a burden where they almost can't even afford their property because they can't charge the rents anyway. So we have that cycle, and so when we think of these opportunity zones, what I think is best for us is, and I was excited when Scarlett invited me down here. I didn't realize you guys had planned this far ahead. I was like, wow, it is. He said it best. I mean, this is forward-thinking, innovative, exciting stuff. And so what you have to put the pressure on us. We got to work together because we need to really create that plan that says, okay, if we're going to create affordable housing, if we're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the community through these tax credits or through our home and through our CDBG or whatever it is, that we do it in a strategic way that maximizes the ability so that we can touch everyone involved. And in some cases, maybe it's putting points in our application, or sometimes maybe it's looking at a way that says, okay, we don't necessarily want it to be the opportunity zone area. Maybe we want it to be adjacent, across the street or somewhere located to it, or maybe we want to work with restoring an old piece of property, so we have the historic tax credits involved. Let's do this in an effort, and the nice thing that we can get to is, like, let's say in our plan we have 5 goals for this area, and that 5 goals is going to be, we want this area restored, we want this building saved, we want these many units created that does this, we want the properties and the investments to look this way because we want it to have the fabric of our community, right? SHPO, I used to work with SHPO a lot, and I was like, David Morgan was the SHPO, and where I'm from in Kentucky. And I was like, in 50 years, you're going to be dying in front of a Walmart saying, this is the fabric of our community, save it. And, right?
Not me.
I don't know. In 50 years.
You can't make the deal work, tear it down. Like, we're not the chain ourselves to the building.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe she won't. But he's like 50 years old, that's the fabric of our community. I was like, so what do you hate Walmart? What in 50 years you're going to be like these little chain stores? Because the little strip malls, especially down the highways, those little motels and stuff on the old highways that used to be, he would want to save those, right? But so I think it's what should come out for us is the point of contact with the mayor and the economic development with this group is let's create a strategic plan that harnesses our money with your goals so that we're investing in a way that meets what the community needs. It preserves the culture, the integrity, and also provides the services needed for the many families you've got in your community that need it. That's it.
So we'll take questions, except for we will not take a question about the SOB or the Historic Strip Club. But any other questions, I'm open to it. There you have it. Any questions? Well, we might need to talk about the SOB now.
There's a question up there.
Okay, 1 second. She'll get you the mic. Up there.
Yeah. Oh, over here, okay. A bit off.
Ms. Saunders, you mentioned tax credits for cultural districts and downtown development districts. Historic districts also are included with the in the area?
Well, we have two different programs, and for the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program, the National Register Historic Districts are being individually listed in the National Register as the qualifier for that program. With our state program, it's buildings that are in the cultural districts or buildings that are in downtown development districts, but they work independently of National Register historic districts or even local historic districts. But a lot of times we have an overlap, and that's where you're able to access both credits.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brad, how do you see these strategic plans working in the respective areas that you talked about earlier?
Well, each entity, be it the participating jurisdiction or the entitlement area, we're all required to create what we call a consolidated plan and an action plan. I think that for me, what would be good is working with the doctor that was up here and us as we put together our strategic plan, our consolidated plan, annual action plans, that we do it in unison with one another.
Allison, question, what's the difference between a cultural district and a downtown development district?
That's a really good question. So downtown development districts are usually established by legislature. So there's legislation that decides where DDDs are. In certain cases, some communities with home rule charter have in the past established their own DDDs. But there are usually some kind of restrictions or tax functions that those have. Now with cultural districts, those were created with the idea of concentrating resources in areas that communities found to be sources of art or, food or places you really want to have these big hubs, so you're looking at these specific cultural areas. So when the legislation was actually enabled, it opened the door to the state commercial tax credit program, and it also offered the tax-free sale of original works of art. So it was kind of a two-pronged incentive. When we kind of underwent a lot of these tax credit haircuts and different tax benefit haircuts that happened in 2015. Unfortunately, the tax-free sale of work of art was one of the things that got trimmed. So with that one now, that's what I say, some of these things are just complicated enough, to make them, ugh. But so now you can do the local sales tax-free original works of art, but you still have to pay state taxes on them. Vendors have to pay that. So that's the big difference. And the cultural districts are actually established through application within a different OCD, the Office of Cultural Development. We're like the real OCD. But just ask the people that work there. But instead of being under the Division of Administration, like I said, we fall under the Office of the Lieutenant Governor. So different group. But those are the big differences.
So with the cultural district, basically you save on state taxes.
With the cultural districts, that's going to offer you a credit on historic buildings, a state credit on historic buildings if you rehab within that district, and then vendors can sell works of art where the people only pay tax for the local level.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so Charles, there's a question here. What is the best reason for establishing an EDD with new tax?
You have a worthy project that, and this is usually the test in other jurisdictions, but for the Economic Development District and either the increment from the city or the new tax, the project wouldn't happen the way it should be. And by that I mean it's not whether they're going to do the project, it's whether the project's going to be done in a way that your community wants it done with the proper, not minimum landscaping, but excessive landscaping. The project that we just finished for the Marriott in downtown Baton Rouge, one of the principal reasons that was an EDD is that, yes, we do have a Starbucks, but the whole corner of this site at Main and Main is a public area. And they would never have done that without an economic development district. So it's filling the gap to get a worthy project, not whether the project happens or not, but the nature, the characteristics, the quality of the project.
Okay. Karen, there's a question for you. What type of grants do you give in order to achieve your mission?
I'm sorry, what was it? What kind of grants?
Yes. Do you give grants in order to achieve your mission?
Yes, we do give grants. It's an annual competition. We just actually it was just closed last week on the 31st. That gives out assessment and cleanup grants and multi-purpose. So those will accomplish the mission of addressing the environmental to free up the project to move on to development.
Very good. And the final question is for Brad. What types of partnerships do you have with nonprofit groups, if any?
What types of partnerships?
Yes.
I mean, a lot. That's, we're required to. We work with CHODOs and community action agencies and non-CHODO nonprofits. We actually have a open window funding type of opportunity for nonprofits if they want to build less than 4 homes to come in, to put an application in, and they can build 4 homes to buy, for homeowners to buy or to rent. We work a lot with nonprofits, local lead agencies. Yeah.
Any more questions? Then I will turn it over to Monique. Thank you. And let's thank the panel for being here and providing this information.
And you guys did it on time.
We did.
So I'm gonna wrap this up, and then we're gonna bring Mayor Robideau on to give a few closing remarks. A little bit of housekeeping. We have some cards for on the road lending for Michelle right here. If you want her contact information as you walk out, you can grab one of these cards. I think I said 3 takeaways this morning: project development, fund development, and I'm drawing a blank on my 3rd takeaway. But the 4th takeaway is the layering opportunities, and maybe that was the 3rd takeaway. These are really critical to great projects, and so it's been a long day, and I want to thank everybody. I really want to thank Chad, because he really is responsible for all of the panelists, the great panelists that traveled here, and OCC and FDIC, new partners in crime. That's it. And Mayor Robideau, I'm going to let Mayor Robideau come close us out.
All right, 3 minutes, and we're out of here on time. So this is like the end of a great day. Certainly, I know Monique thanked FDIC and OCC, and I can't say enough about the partnership that you guys put together here. So Chad, Monique, the folks from the FDIC and OCC, thank y'all so much for participating. I know I've heard it a lot of times that we're actually ahead of the game as it relates to a lot of places. And so that's a proud moment for us, but I think just as importantly, it's going to be beneficial. I heard Charles talk about the economic development districts. It's an election year, so I suffered through the frustration. Even some of my more willing council persons are saying, please don't make us vote on that during an election year. But when I think of the University Avenue, the Gateway Corridor, it's hard for me to envision not having that discussion, but we'll see where that goes. I know that Brad had talked about a lot on partnerships, and so for us, my generation, for those of you that are from around here, know the area of Four Corners, which is part of the University Gateway Corridor. And when I was a younger teenager, the Four Corners area of Lafayette is where our parents would go to dinner and drop us off at the movie theater. And it was a place of activity. It was a place that I look back on with affection and fondly. If I was to go to Four Corners now, it would be for an hour or so of comfort, I guess is the nicest way to put it, at the LUS Pay Motel. And so the Four Corners facility, the Four Corners for me is the emphasis of the Gateway. Without Four Corners being brought back to what it once was, then I don't feel like the Gateway into Lafayette will be a success. And so as we talked about the low-income tax credits, one of the projects to get that one of those 4 quadrants back into commerce was on that LUS Pay site. And so any help we can certainly get from you guys, whether it be I think the 4% is, I don't want to say in the bank, but the 9% would help with the gap financing. So any conversations we can have, certainly hope to have those, because that's a part of the community that has been neglected for so long. I'm not that old, but in my time as a teenager to 56 years old, I've seen it decline to where the only conversation that was going on is, well, let's tear it down and put a police precinct there. And I just had a visceral negative reaction to that, because it just reinforces the stereotype of that's all that really belongs there. I do not think that's the case. I think we need to put it back into commerce, generate a lot of activity, and it will be one of the shining examples of what efforts like the Opportunity Zone, the Economic Development Districts, of what can happen if everyone gets on the same page, believes in an area, believes in a project, and then all of the things that happen after that will come. And so I thank everybody that came here today to listen, and I hope at the end of the day that your takeaways are that this truly is an opportunity that has never existed before, not at the level that it exists now. We are leading the charge, the Acadiana region, but it can't stop with the knowledge that you heard today, right? We need to start the implementation piece as soon as possible. I'm thrilled that Lafayette General and the foundation is leading the way to show that, hey, if a few folks get together and say this is what we're doing, that it actually can happen, and that it will, as much as anything, prove the concept to a lot of other projects that are out there. So know that you've got to form partnerships, figure out who you want them to be with. They need to be good partners, because it's not going to be an easy process, because there are a lot of unknowns still with the program. But know that you need to form those partnerships. Know that you need to do some due diligence as it relates to establishing your fund, so that you can attract the right investors, the right equity partners. And more than anything else, just know that we are being watched by the rest of the state. And so let's prove them correct in that, looking to us to lead the way, that they can then follow in our footsteps and be good statewide partners with them and help them in their efforts to move forward. So I'm just asking everybody to stay diligent, stay focused, and let's make this happen here. Thank you all for coming.